Good afternoon, everyone. We're still perhaps waiting for some people, but we can begin by doing a brief introduction of the company. Thank you for joining us here today. I hope you're all feeling well. My name is Alexander Sitwell. I studied theology at Durham University, and I've now moved to Georgia, where I'm currently working. I moved here because I thought I'd expand my horizons, but also because it's a truly beautiful and wonderful country, and I really like living here. So the company I'm currently working for and the company which has brought you this webinar is called English Book Education. Our company is divided up into 8 pillars, providing services such as continuous professional development for teachers, higher education, primary and secondary school education, preschool education, unique learning, which is our English language school situated in Farke, bookshop.g, qualifications, and the Kings and Queens Club. I specifically am here representing the Kings and Queens Club. So what is the Kings and Queens Club, and what is it that we do? To become a member of the Kings and Queens Club is to become part of a national and ever-growing book club. Working with over 40 schools, it is my job to visit each school once a month, where we will have a discussion about the title which the students have been given. Currently, we have given away more than 50,000 books across Georgia for free. So during these sessions, we explore the key themes present in the book, the author, the historical context which may have influenced the novel, but as well as that, we get the students to make their own presentations on the book, to communicate to us their own opinion. And we think it's really important that they develop presentation skills. We see that as a really invaluable skill for them to develop. So moving on, our current presentation webinar for today is surrounding the question of personality and whether personality can change. I'll tell you from the outset, and this may seem slightly anticlimactic to all of you listening, there's actually quite an obvious answer to this question. And actually this presentation isn't concerned with that question because I will answer it for you from the very outset. Personality can change, and it's a given, and I'll explain to you in a moment why it is a given. So what we will be exploring more in this presentation is how personality can change incrementally, as in how you can change your personality incrementally, how changing personality is like losing weight, RAP, which is the 3 key stages to changing your personality, and then, but also on the other hand, how personality can change radically. Okay, because we can change our personalities incrementally, but they can also change very radically, right? And there's 2 different approaches going on here. And then finally, we'll take a look at the hero's journey and the archetypal narrative that exists within all of us, this archetypal narrative which drives us towards adventure and drives us towards change. All right. So to begin with, in order to discuss personality change, I think it's only really worth discussing it if we have a desire to change our personalities, perhaps. Let's take the Wizard of Oz, for example. You've got the Tin Man, you've got the Straw Man, and you've got the Lion. Now, there's something all 3 of them share in common, and that is they all have one very significant personality fault, a personality fault that they would all like to change. In the case of the Tin Man lacks a heart. He can't feel things, and therefore he wants to be able to feel. He wants to have the ability to love, so he wants a heart. The Straw Man lacks a brain. He says he doesn't know anything, so he wants a brain. He wants to be more intelligent. And then the Lion, well, the Lion has the issue of cowardice. He's a cowardly lion, and he would like to develop the personality trait of being braver. Now, the 3 of them go on this adventure, and they all hope that the Wizard of Oz this magician, this great magician, will be the answer to their problems, and that he will grant them the personality traits that they desire. Now, they all want to change an aspect of their personality, and I'd like to ask to all of you listening, can you identify something in your personality that you yourself would like to change? Now, before you answer, the best way to answer questions during these webinars, I would suggest if you put your answers into the group chat, and I will be keeping an eye on the group chat throughout this whole webinar. So if you want to put any answers in there or any questions at any point in the presentation, please do. So Nino Shergalashvili says, yes, there is an element of her personality she would like to change. She would like to be an extrovert. Very relatable, Nino, as well, yeah. How do the rest of us feel? Do we all have a desire to change something about ourselves? I certainly do. Well, either way, if you are a person who believes there's nothing you want to change about yourself, your personality is fine as it is, you will be among a minority of people, because this is what the research suggests. "7,000 people were surveyed between the ages of 18 and 70, and they were asked a very simple question. Is there something you would like to change about your personality? And if so, what? More than 90% of people had a wish to change. Now, I'd be curious, can you guess what was the personality change that most people wanted to have? Which specific personality traits do you think most people wanted to improve? And this seems to be a universal. This is something a lot of people want to improve about themselves. Can we guess what it might be? Well, specifically, the most common thing people wanted to change about themselves was their emotional stability. People wanted to be more emotionally stable and less neurotic. And it's curious why that's the specific trait people want to change. Why do you think that's the specific trait people want to change? Why didn't they say something like, I'd like to be more extroverted, or I'd like to be more conscientious? It seems people have this, people want to find ways of avoiding suffering. And I suppose the largest form of suffering comes in the form of the psychological. So I'm not sure. But anyway, that's what people said. And before we continue any further, just so we make sure we've got our terminology straight, these are the 5 key personality traits identified in psychological literature. So you have trait openness, i.e. openness, being open to new things, being adventurous, being explorative. Conscientiousness essentially means something like being hardworking, being persistent, being disciplined. Extroversion is, again, similar to openness, the ability and the desire to be with other people and to socialize with other people more, as opposed to introversion. Agreeableness, trait agreeableness, typically trait agreeableness you'll find within mothers, because you need to be agreeable as a mother, because you need to have altruistic traits towards your child. And neuroticism is essentially high levels of negative emotion, right? So this is the good news. For all the folk, that 90% of that 7,000 folk who all said they wanted to change something about their personality, the good news is the data suggests that it is possible. Now, the specific study they did here was with university students, and they followed university students for a year. And essentially, what the data showed is that people tend to change in line with their desires if they act upon them. So if you have a desire to become something different, to gain a personality trait or to improve a personality trait. More likely than not, that if you act upon that desire, you'll be successful. However, the thing to bear in mind is your success will be very limited still. The improvement will be very incremental. So the way the study explained it is that if you assess your extroversion as a 3 out of 5, if you wanted to improve it over this course of a year, you could probably only improve it by about a half to 3.5 out of 5. So essentially, with these incremental changes, you can probably only reach the average scale of that specific personality trait among all other people's. But the question is, okay, so how do you do it? I mean, it's all well and good saying that it can happen, but the harder question is to ask, how does it happen? So what do you have to do to change your personalities? Well, it's a quite a old saying, but it's something like fake it until you make it. Acting like the person you want to be. So even if you're an extrovert, but you act, so even if you're an introvert, but you act out an extrovert characteristic or extrovert behavior, it'll eventually become fused with your personality. So fake it until you make it. That's what that means. And there's a certain way of going about this, right? So for example, participants were asked to take 1 to 4 intentional steps per week. So you shouldn't do anything too drastic. And I'm going to stick with the extroversion introversion personality trait. So for someone who wants to be more introverted, for someone who wants to be more extroverted, who's an introvert, it'd probably be a bad idea just to suddenly throw yourself into a huge party with lots of people, because that's too extreme and that might be potentially so traumatic for you, you'll never attempt to be extroverted again. Rather, you should take 1 to 4 intentional steps per week. So what you might do is you might set yourself a goal that this week I will go up to a stranger and say hello and ask them, how are you doing? Just basic things. And basically RAP are the 3 key principles behind this. So your ambition should be realistic. Dream big, but take small steps. So, like I said, don't throw yourself into a party. Maybe that's the eventual goal, but take small steps towards that. Actionable. Don't have vague behavior goals. So saying something like, I want to talk more, that's really vague. You need to be more specific with yourself. You need to give yourself more instructions. So what you might say is, this week I will call Jack 3 times and I will invite some friends over for dinner, right? Give yourself structure. And lastly, be persistent. Make goals every week and do it continuously. Don't give up. Now, so a good analogy I heard behind these steps is the analogy of losing weight. And the specific example that was given, there's a man, and basically he reads some science textbooks on how to lose weight. And essentially, if you have a 750 calorie deficit every single day, you will lose weight, and you'll lose weight consistently, or at least eventually. So this man very strictly followed his calorie deficit of 750 calories per day. And at the beginning, he was very successful. His weight went down consistently every single day until he hit a point. Okay? He hit a point where the weight scale simply would not budge. 2 days passed, the scale wouldn't budge. It stuck at 100. Next day, it was still at 100. The 4th day, still at 100. And this went on for 2 weeks. He was doing everything correctly. He was maintaining the 750 calorie deficit. He was going to the gym. He was sticking to his plan. But in times like this, one will feel that they want to give up because it seems no matter what they do, they see no change. But he remembered to trust the science, because the science literally says it is impossible to maintain a 750 calorie deficit per day and not to lose weight. So 2 weeks passed, and then suddenly the scales started going down again. And they went down quickly, almost as if the scales were making up for lost time. It's the same thing when you're attempting to change your personality. So at the beginning, you'll feel progress, you'll feel micro gains, but you might hit a wall where you feel that there's no progress, and that happens quite a lot whenever you're developing anything. The line goes up and then it flattens for quite a long time, but you've got to be patient, and again, trust the science, because the science suggests that this is all really doable. Okay, now that's one approach to changing personality, but then there's another approach, and a lot of this is taken from a lecturer called Professor Jordan Peterson, who I can always reference you later on. And he says something like this: when you're born, it's almost as if a set of dice has been thrown, and that set of dice will reveal the personality traits that you're going to have. We almost feel like that we're born with the personalities that we have, and that they feel quite unchanging and stable. And by the way, personality is stable, because you still do need to have a set identity and character. It's stable, but it can also be subject to change. But anyway, it feels like dice have been rolled and you've been born a certain type of character. Now, it's really important to identify what personality traits you have and what personality traits you have more strongly than others, because that way you can match your personality trait to a specific profession which requires it. And professions can be, and personality trait can be very predictive of what sort of career you're going to go into, or at least what type of career you would be successful in, as is shown in this image on the left. So Jordan Peterson would certainly not advise a very creative person to become a banker or a lawyer, because as a banker and a lawyer, you have to deal with structures, and you have to maintain those structures, i.e. the law, rules, economic principles. Okay? But to prove this point more clearly, that personality trait really is tied to profession, is one study they did with lawyers. So I believe there was something along the lines of 100 law firms put forward their most creative lawyer. 100 law firms put forward their most creative lawyers. And that was determined by the law firm boss, who would have a good idea of the personality traits of their employees. So anyway, they tested these 100 creative lawyers, and they tested them for what was their strongest personality trait. And by the way, the majority, their strongest personality trait still wasn't creativity. Their personality was still dominated by very high levels of conscientiousness, i.e. hardworking and the ability to structure things and to be disciplined, right? So even the most creative person within an industry that benefits conscientiousness will still be more conscientious than they are creative. But we've also got to understand what personality transformation is, because with the previous things we were talking about, it's all well and good improving your personality incrementally and doing it cautiously. But learning what you expect and what you want isn't really learning at all, or at least not in a significant way, because you're only going to reach the average of the personality trait that you desire. In fact, our personalities can change in a far more radical way. And the times that our personalities change in a more radical way is when we experience things that we don't want to and things that we don't expect. That is when we have the most radical personality change, and it actually destabilizes the personality, but also has the potential to expand it. So I mean, could we think of some concrete examples of experiencing something you didn't want to experience, weren't expecting to experience, but may have had such a radical impact on you that it changed certain aspects of your personality? Can we think of any examples of that? Or perhaps we have some questions so far. Is there anything you'd like me to explain more clearly? Any suggestions at all? An experience that might radically affect your personality? And specifically an experience you don't expect or want to happen. Okay, so typically, okay, we've got an answer here. Okay, so perhaps the death of a loved one, to take one of the most extreme examples. Yeah, Nino, absolutely. So death of your relatives. You might, one day, your world might be completely flipped upside down, and suddenly you experience so much undue suffering due to loss. Yeah, like I said, your world might get flipped upside down, and suddenly you learn the nature of suffering because you haven't experienced suffering before. And two things will happen to you. Either you'll that change will be so radical that you'll become depressed and you'll essentially self-destruct, or you'll learn the nature of suffering, and you'll be more equipped for the latter suffering that life may bring. Your character will change significantly, and either you'll be able to withstand that change or it won't, but it will change nevertheless. And the slightly tragic thing I'm saying here, but I think this is the truth. The most radical personality changes just don't happen voluntarily. And that's just a brute reality, in my opinion. If you disagree, please do put it in the group chat. So Jordan Peterson, who's this Canadian psychologist, this is what he suggests, how you should consider changing yourself if you want to do it willingly, and if you want to do it in a way that has radical results. He suggests you sit down and you conceptualize or write down, where do you see yourself in 5 years, and how would you like to be in 5 years? What would be the ideal you in 5 years' time? Okay? But then also think about this. While you've conceptualized the ideal you in 5 years' time, also conceptualize the opposite. Where is the worst possible place you could be in 5 years' time? Right? So you've got now this binary, perfect possible outcome and worst possible outcome. Okay? And he says the way that you should make your decision in going towards what you ideally want is by maintaining this principle, and that is to take care of yourself like you would take care of someone you care about. Now, what does he mean by this? I've put up an image of some dogs being cared for by human beings. And what I will say is that some human beings take better care of their dogs. They feed them, cut their fur, give them medicine, better than they take care of themselves. Okay? I'm sure we can all relate to this, that we take better care of other people than we take care of ourselves. And I want to ask you, why do you think that is? Why do you think human beings take worse care of themselves and better care of other people? Why do you think that is? Why don't we take care of ourselves? Well, perhaps it's because, yes, low self-esteem. And if I'm correct in saying this, Deanna, by low self-esteem, you have a low sense of worth. And part of the reason you have a low sense of worth is because no one knows your faults and defects better than you do. And therefore, perhaps you might punish yourself, and you might not, you punish yourself and you might not think yourself worthy of your own respect. Yes, and you don't respect yourself. Pride can definitely also play a part. So Jordan Peterson says that actually, while you know your defects and while you don't respect yourself, trust me, you're not the only person in that boat. Almost everyone else is in that boat. And the right way to conceptualize your life is to take care of yourself like you would take care of someone else. Try and view yourself from the outside as though you are someone who is worthy of respect and someone who is worthy of kindness. Am I a dog person or a cat person? I switch between the two. More of a cat person, but more of a cat person. Cats are less needy and they're more independent, and I get too lazy to walk my dog sometimes. Anyway, yeah, that's the key principle. And then you'll feel suddenly more motivated, because suddenly working on yourself is essentially taking care of somebody, and you feel that responsibility suddenly towards yourself that perhaps you didn't feel before. And the good reason to conceptualize the worst possible outcome of your life and to really imagine the worst possible thing is because because fear can also be a motivator. Fear can also drive you in the opposite direction, and it's good to have that sort of momentum behind you. Okay. Do we have any questions, anything we'd like to add? Anything we'd like to add at all? Which approach do we agree with more, the first one or the second one? Do we believe in this more incremental changes and focusing on the now? Or do we consider that, like Peterson, we should consider the large-scale picture and to put our entire life into context? What do we think? What did sound more appealing to you? Okay. You agree with the first one. Okay. So more incremental, slower changes. Perhaps you don't want to have a radical personality shift. Okay, any other opinions, any other questions, anything anyone would like to add at all? Okay. Yes, because otherwise you'll lose yourself, is what Deanna says. Yes. Yes, potentially. You potentially could lose yourself. But on the other hand, you might lose yourself whether you like it or not, because you might experience something radical anyway, which you didn't choose. Yeah. Life is full of suffering, and what I like about Peterson's approach is that you need to prepare for the days when you will suffer, and you need to make your personality more resilient. At least this is what I think. This is what I agree with him, that it's more important to learn how to deal with suffering than to attempt to achieve happiness. Happiness will come on its own, but I think like a higher priority is to become resilient. But anyway, that's my opinion. Okay, so something that really, and I was talking about the inevitability of personality change, and this is relating to the hero's journey. The hero's journey was best explained in by Joseph Campbell, who I believe was a professor of mythology, although I'll have to double check that. And the hero's journey essentially relates to a very common narrative that we get in lots of stories. And it is of the individual who has a call to adventure, but then descends into an abyss, hell, faces some deep trauma or some existential fight. And this could be physical or just psychological. And then they eventually emerge out of this abyss, transformed and reborn as a hero. And they return. And this is present in lots of different stories. And I think actually it's especially present in the first thing we were talking about, which is The Wizard of Oz. And The Wizard of Oz is a similar thing, is you've got these three characters who are all naive in some way, who lack a certain degree of maturity. And they go on this long and winding road, and they go through dark woods, they fight monkey demons, they fight witches, and they have to experience serious trauma. They have to put themselves through things that are incredibly uncomfortable and incredibly terrifying. And only once they've done that do they emerge as braver, smarter, and more feeling. In fact, it turns out the Wizard of Oz is a fraud, because it's not as easy as going down a straight road and just asking someone to do it for you. Opposite, you need to go down the winding road, and you have to go through the woods, the forest, and danger to truly transform yourself. And that's why it's good to feel a sense of a call to adventure. Peterson says we should all go on an adventure, and that's perhaps the only way that we can develop ourselves. Yeah. And, you know, there's lots of stories that have this hero's journey. It's almost present in all of them, actually, including the most famous literature like Harry Potter, even the Spider-Man movies. Perhaps you could name a film or a novel which has this fundamental underlying narrative going on in it, of the child or the person who emerges as a hero after their journey. Can we think of any examples? Perhaps any other examples of the hero's journey narrative? Source Code. Is that the one with the chap on the train? Yeah. Trying to remember that movie. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a hero narrative there. Yeah, and I suppose at the beginning of the movie, he's not aware. Yeah, Jake Gyllenhaal, and I suppose Jake Gyllenhaal, he's not aware that he's in this simulation, and then he has to die multiple times. Yeah, that's a really good example. Then he has to die multiple times, and eventually he's reborn and has the understanding of things, the understanding of the nature of reality, and that actually what he sees is not reality. Yeah, I mean, that works, definitely. Symbolically, it definitely has archetypal elements. Let's move this. At first he was insecure, but then he becomes a hero. For sure. Yes. Exactly. And I think, again, that's a very common narrative. And perhaps we'll experience this narrative in our lives as well. And maybe we can all emerge as heroes one day. Okay. Is there anything else anyone would like to add before I tell you what is next up with our webinars? What's the next topic? Is there anything else anyone would like to add? No? Okay. So if you want to know where I got my information from, where these studies were conducted, etc., please just tell us your emails and we'll be in touch with you, and we will send you all the material that you need if you want to do further research and look into this topic in more detail. The next webinar will be revolved around this piece of non-fiction by Jordan B. Peterson, and the book is called 12 Rules for Life. It's essentially a self-help book, but it also deals in myth, and it has a lot of biblical symbolism, and it uses old stories and old wisdoms, and it tries to bring it to the present. And the key idea behind this book is that we've abandoned the knowledge and wisdoms of the past. Can you write here the name of that book? Can you not see the image? There's a book. Can you not see it clearly? So it's the book we'll be analysing is Jordan B. Peterson. Jordan B. Peterson, 12 Rules for Life. And that will take place on Friday, the 27th of March at 4 p.m. You're welcome, Deanna. My pleasure. I appreciate it. If you don't have any further questions or anything else you'd like to say about this topic, the session is over. So yeah, I'll say goodbye and thank you for your participation. I appreciate you all being here.